Thanks, Rob. Hi, everybody. Welcome tonight. As Rob pointed out, I'll be taking you through some SAT strategies. But before I do, I want to at least give you my information, my email, my phone number, in case you want to follow up with me directly if you have more specific questions. So my email is here on the board, anthonyr@review.com, and my phone number is listed as well. I will put this up at the end of the session tonight. Again, if you have follow-up questions, you want to reach out to me. I've been teaching SAT for over 17 years and working for Princeton Review and helping students and families either get into college or get better test scores. So tonight I'm going to be talking about some of the mistakes people make, as well as some of the tips and things you can take with you, and hopefully it'll help you move forward with this. One thing I want to just have you keep in mind is, let me back up here, is for the agenda tonight, this is what it looks like, but what this workshop is not going to be is a substitute for true preparation. So for those of you coming on tonight and looking like, hey, I'm taking my SAT in a few weeks, this is not meant to be the end-all, be-all for preparation. It's going to give you some insight, it'll give you some directions, but you're not supposed to be walking away from here and be able to improve your test score by 300 points. So again, I'm going to shed some light on the SAT, about the exam, how you can study for it, things you can do, and again, hopefully you'll learn something, but it's not the only thing you should be doing as your test preparation. So with that said, again, here's the agenda. So I'm going to walk through this fast. There's just so much to cover, and I want to cover as much as I can in a little amount of time. So I'm going to let you look a lot of information up online. You can look at princetonu.com, which is our company's website. But the first thing you need to understand is what's on the SAT. Well, you can look it up. It's a over 3-hour exam. There's math, reading, and writing for those of you unfamiliar with it. It's scored from 800 on each section. There's some average test scores right here. It's offered 7 times a year. You can look all this information up. This stuff is stuff you can find. What I want to focus on is more that strategy and those tips that are going to help you. You can look at what is on the reading. You got a couple sections on reading. You have a couple sections on math. You have some writing, a writing section that has the grammar and an essay. And again, you can look at that. Where I want to focus is on shaping the idea of this exam, so you understand what you're up against, because a lot of students, they think it's a measure of your intelligence, and that's a misconception. So on this page right here, I'm talking about misconceptions. It's also a misconception that if you do well in school or in high school, you're going to ace the SAT. Well, I'm proof that it's not true, because I did very well in high school and I did not ace the SAT. There's a misconception that you can't learn how to increase your scores, that best scores win in college admissions, and you probably know a lot of students who have over 4.0 GPAs, great test scores, and they didn't get into the college that they wanted to go to. That happens quite often. And that test scores are becoming less important. These are all misconceptions about the SAT. What I want to talk to you about is the truth, the testing truths. What is it really? So what does the SAT really measure? And what it really measures is how well you take the SAT. Now, some students, they can go in there and they can take the test and get 2,300. By the way, it's out of 2,400. So 2,300 would be an amazing score. Maybe they're born with that. And most of us, like myself, we're just not born with it. We're maybe not great test takers. And you have to learn how to be a good SAT test taker. So understand, don't take these scores personally. If you've taken a practice test, if you've taken the PSAT, don't take the test scores personally. You're just maybe not a great SAT test taker. Okay? But the good news is you can be coached to improve your score. It's hard to coach someone to increase their intelligence or their IQ, whatever you want to call it. It's not as hard to increase your test scores, your SAT test scores. We can do that. I've seen it. I've done it with students over a 2-month period. That can happen. So that's the good news. Okay. So here are the truths. It doesn't measure your intelligence. You can increase your scores. GPA and the classes you take in high school are still the most important things in the admissions decision. And still, test scores are highly relied on, so you can't just totally forget them. Okay. So when we look at your high school career, to put it all in perspective, your test scores are one piece of the whole application, one piece of the puzzle. It's a very important piece, but there are so many other things. So don't get hung up on this. It just happens to be probably the most anxiety-provoking of all the items in this kind of application process. So to help you along the way, being prepared and knowing what you're up against is really going to come in handy. It's going to help you along the way, and hopefully it'll ultimately get you into the school you want to go to. So my session for the next 30 minutes, I'm going to be talking about how to succeed on the SAT. And for me, I've broken it down into 5 categories of how you're going to succeed. This is kind of my teaser slide. So here are the 5 categories, and I'll be touching on them along the way, and I'll comment on them along the way. So one of the first things that's really, really important for you to understand is who's writing the exam, what they're all about, and what's covered on the test. We call it that. Just know your enemy. And the enemy for, or what I like to call it, are the people who write the exam. And if you don't know, the people who write the exam, they're called the Educational Testing Service. Okay, but I sometimes call them this. I call them the Evil Testing Service. Just because sometimes they make it hard for students, and I was one of those students, to do well in the exam. So there's a lot of things about this exam that aren't straightforward. So if we understand the author, the test writers, ETS, and how they put a test together, it's going to help us. If we understand how it's scored, what the point system is, how it's predictable, any tricks on the exam, it's going to help us. So for you, one of the first things you can do is look at a test, see what it looks like, and really understand it, and that's going to help us out. All right. Let's move on to the next one. So why do we take the SAT? And a lot of people think, well, they want to compare us to other testers, which is true, but there's a lot of reasons why you take the SAT. One is they want to compare you, but two, it's a money-making machine. Unfortunately, most students take the test more than once because they score right in this middle range here. Most students will take the test and they score right around 500 in each subject area, so about a 1,500 in each section. Well, that's not a great score. It's a normal Bell distribution curve, and if everybody scored in this range, on the 800, 7 to 800, it wouldn't be a credible test. If everybody scored in this range, no one would go to colleges, and the colleges would hate the test writers. So most people score in the middle range. And it's purposely done on how they give the questions, because the questions can come in the form of easy, medium, or difficult. Questions have become very tricky. And the test writers actually, and I'll show you in a minute, can put on questions there that they know you'll get wrong by the way they give the question. So it's really important that, again, we understand these test writers. It's going to help us. So why do students struggle with the SAT? There's a lot of reasons. One is it's designed so you can't finish. There's a lot of pressure to finish the exam. It's also written very tricky, okay? So as opposed to high school, your high school teachers, they want to assess what they've taught you. So it's a very content-oriented test. The reading you could read at home in high school versus under time constraints on the SAT. The grammar on the SAT can be very tricky, and the math covers more than 1 year. It covers 4 to 5 years of math, while in high school you're being tested on that math that current year. So these are a lot of reasons why they struggle. And again, I'm painting this picture for you about the SAT so you understand from a different perspective than, oh, they just want to see how smart I am. Because if that's the case, you're going to fall for a lot of the different traps that they have set for you. So let's kind of talk about a little game that I'm going to play with you. And if you want to chat in the answer, I'm going to say a word, and when I say the word, I'd love for you to just chat in a little word or that comes to your mind. So this is kind of a word association game that we're going to play. So here's the first word, and whatever comes to your mind, chat it in, or even just say it in your head. That's fine. And the first word is peanut butter. And Rob, if anybody chats something in, please share it with me. Let me know if I
Jelly,
got
jelly,
anything.
jelly, 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 brown sandwich, jelly, jelly, sandwich, gross.
Perfect. All right, here's the next word. I'm going to give you guys another word. Boy.
Girl, 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 young, toy, girl, girl, blue, cat.
Okay, there you go. All right. And now here's another association. I want you to think of a number, any number, and just type it in or think of it in your head.
14, 16, 1, 4, 13, 90, 14, 42, 2, 7.
Perfect. Okay, so again, I made these slides before the session tonight, but most of you picked jelly or bread, okay? And most of you picked girl. Somebody picked toy, which was interesting. So you might think a little different. But the reason I do an exercise like this is to show you I'm not the only one who knows what you're going to say. The people who write these tests, they know these average Joes, or they're very, as people, we're very predictable. They know what we're going to say, and they actually use that information to help create these exams. Because if everyone says jelly on a question, then it's going to be an easy question. So whether you knew it or not, there are experimental questions. There's an experimental section on the SAT. Well, that section, you don't know which one it is, so you're kind of this guinea pig. And they use that to help them determine what type of question it is. So if it's a question everybody gets right, which would maybe be this, the answer might be jelly, peanut butter or jelly. Oh, everyone's going to get that one. It's going to be an easy question, so they know where to place that question. If everyone gets it wrong, it's going to be a hard question, and they know they might use it again to create that distribution curve. So they're not going to put questions where everyone's going to get them all right. Again, the test wouldn't be credible then, and they wouldn't have that bell curve. So it's really important that you understand. The same with the numbers you picked. Nobody picked a negative number. Who picked a decimal? 1.742. Nobody picked a fraction here. We picked 2 or 40 or 11. One person picked 90, which was high, but still not a crazy number. So we're all average, and you need to understand how average you are because it's actually going to help us take this exam. Okay. The next tip, and again, because of time, I'm only spending a little bit of time on each little section, but this can be kind of spaced out over weeks and weeks of understanding how to test. And that's the kind of preparation you might need if you want to improve your test score hundreds and hundreds of points. Don't think you can go in tomorrow and you're going to get 200 more points because now you know that you know about the average Joe and how they write the test. There's a lot more to it. The next tip is taking the test on your own terms. You need to understand your personality. Well, whether you're an average Joe and you kind of are very predictable, how to manage your test, how to pace yourself, how much time should you spend per question, and it's going to be different for everybody based on what your goals are. And I'll give you an example here. This is what a math section looks like on the SAT. Okay, so you'll see here that there's an 18-question section, a 20-question section, and a 16-question. And in each of these sections, the questions are separated. So, for example, this 20-question section goes from easy questions to medium to hard. You actually can know, the great news is you should know where all the easy, medium, and questions are in the math section. Okay? Now, taking the test on your own terms, and what I mean by that is, for example, I had a student once I was tutoring, and they were scoring a 420 on math. Okay? When I looked at their test, they happened to answer every single question. And what I did notice, for example, if we were looking at the 20-question section, this is what was happening for this student. But they were answering every single question, okay? And they were scoring 420. Well, the problem here was when I looked at him and I said, well, your math isn't that great. The other thing is the way you take the test doesn't work from you. You're never going to score an 800, which is fine. But what I need you to do is stop even attempting the medium and hard questions because you get them all wrong anyway. And what I need you to do is make sure you get these easy ones right. So what we worked on is more accuracy versus trying to answer more questions. And if we can get more accurate, we can improve our score because when you get a question wrong, you lose actually some points. And The harder questions take longer time. So he was spending most of his time on the hard questions and being very, very careless. So his pacing was off. So what we ended up doing was, in a section like this, we only had him do the first 11 questions, which gave him more time. He can go back to each question to make sure he was accurate. He went from 420 to 620 in 2 months. Now, I taught him some math along the way, but the biggest thing for him was taking it on his own terms, doing the questions he knew how to do, and spending enough time on them not to make careless errors, and making sure he wasn't attempting questions he was never going to get, because his math level wasn't that high. Everybody's going to have a different goal, but for example, if you're not scoring over 650 points on the math, you shouldn't be answering or attempting every single math question. You're just hurting yourself. Okay, so taking the test on your own terms means approaching the exam with a game plan about what kind of tester you are. And it might be different based on your verbal math ability. Maybe math you're answering every question, but maybe in the grammar section you're not, because maybe your grammar isn't up to speed. So it's really going to have a different strategy for each section of the exam. So this taking on your own terms is really important in terms of your pacing. Okay, it's a strategy that a lot of students that I work with at Princeton Review, we employ a pacing plan for each student individually that works for them. Very important, and you can see some great improvements in their score just from doing fewer questions and being more accurate. Okay, so as we move on, here's another tip: process elimination. Now, if I were to actually cover these answer choices, if anyone knew, if it wasn't multiple choice, what the capital of Malawi was, I'd be impressed, number one. But number two, when you put it on a multiple choice test, it's a lot easier to be able to find the answer when you know what the answers are not, and going, oh, look, I can find the answer because I narrowed down my choices, which helps increase the probability of getting something right. Now, the SAT is harder than what I just did here, but the point of what we call process of elimination, POE, is if you can eliminate some answer choices, you're going to help yourself and set yourself up to earn more points on the SAT. It's very important to eliminate wrong answers. And sometimes we don't do it, and we get overwhelmed with 5 answer choices. Now, my students become very good eliminators, as well as what I call on this a skill of guessing, okay, which we're going to go over in 1 second here. Oh, I already did that. So the idea of guessing also comes into play. So now what I'm talking about is strategy, okay, and the strategy of guessing, the strategy of process elimination, the strategy of pacing yourself, taking the test on your own terms. Guessing is a skill. You don't necessarily learn it in school, but it's something that you want to learn on a test like this, because if you can eliminate, you've got to know what to do in every instance. So let's say we had these 4 questions here. Well, when would you guess? And that becomes really important. Well, because the SAT is set up where you actually earn points or lose points based on how you answer a question, it's important to understand the rules of the game. So let's understand the rules of the game. If you get something right, you get a full point. Okay, that's very important. If you get something wrong, you lose a quarter of a point, unless it's a grid-in, which is where you actually produce your own response. You don't lose anything for that. And if you leave it blank, you gain or lose nothing. Okay, that's really important. Okay, so that student I was telling you about, when he was answering all the hard questions and getting it wrong, he was losing a quarter point here, there, and everywhere. So it was better not to have him answer it, because he wasn't getting them right anyway. Now, if we know this is what happens, and this is the scoring system, this will dictate to us how we actually answer a question. Okay, so let's take a look at that. So now, how should we answer this if we know we earn $1 if we put it in money terms, or we lose a quarter? Well, in that scenario, we actually should guess on all of these questions, because we're going to be earning points, which sounds kind of wrong, but because we only lose a quarter of it, my students would guess in every instance of these. Most people would only guess if it was a 50-50 chance. But on the SAT, if you can eliminate 2 choices or even 1, it still works in your favor to guess, which it's hard to fathom. A lot of students go, well, no, I would only guess if I was down to 2 and I felt strongly about 1. Well, what happens is you're actually leaving points on the table, and that's what happens to a lot of students. Again, I told you, just because you do well in school doesn't mean you're going to do well in the SAT, and this is one of the big factors. A lot of students who do well in school don't take the risks on the SAT because they don't want to get something wrong. They'd rather leave it blank. Well, when you do that, you're losing the opportunity to earn more points. It might be a hard concept to get in a few minutes, but you should take a look at that. Again, what I want to do is get you thinking a little bit differently about the SAT, so actually think about it more and actually think, what can I do to help myself? My students, when we work with them, we work on all these strategies. In addition to the content on the test, you need to know how to do an average and a ratio, and you need to understand grammar. But they need to learn these guessing methods, the elimination methods, how to pace themselves, and that strategy in itself helps them become better test takers. Because as I said, this is not measuring your intelligence, this is measuring how well you take the SAT. And so we teach students how to become better SAT test takers. Now some of these things can apply to other things, and hopefully help you become a better test taker overall. So in terms of guessing strategies, some more things. Make sure you place a line through the answer choices in the booklet. Be aggressive. You know, if you can't eliminate any answer choice, then you should skip the question. But if you can eliminate something, guessing is really important. Okay. I'm going to skip this problem because of time, and I'm going to move on to something else here. I'm going to show you this problem, and here's a sample math problem, and I'm just going to show you real quickly this problem. It's a number 17, and the number 17 would be actually kind of hard. Now, at first glance, when I talk about the average Joe and the typical response, when if somebody were to read this problem and really quickly looked at it, and they see eats 2/5 and eats another 2/5, a lot of students will do this really quickly. They'll go, oh, that is 2/5 and 2/5, so if I do 4/5 and this, oh, that would be 1/5. They would circle 1/5, just that quick glance. Well, because it's a hard problem, and this is what I want you to understand, is because it's a hard problem, that it's going to be a harder answer than that. It won't be that simple. So being able to come up with an answer that quickly should tell you something that's probably not the answer. And again, we kind of talked about that peanut butter jelly thing or that boy-girl thing, that word association game. This is kind of a similar thing. Sometimes at first glance, and if you know it's a hard problem, and we can tell by the number of the math question, then it's not going to be that simple of an answer choice. Okay? So I want to make sure you understand that. We call it average Joe in our classes, and we would eliminate 2 of the easier answer choices. Now, a lot of the hard math problems have multiple steps, and just because of time, I'm not going to go through that, but the point is, on a hard question, there's probably multiple steps, and the easy answer choice is probably not the answer. My point in showing you this is to understand that you've got to read the questions carefully. You've got to notice what type of problem it is. And number 2, some of you might not even attempt this problem because it's a hard one already to save time to get the other questions right. So again, this all comes into the strategy of taking the test. So in terms of the math that's tested on this, it's not difficult math. Questions are in order of difficulty. The first third are easy, the middle third medium, the third difficult. Easy questions have easy answers. And some of this understanding of the test is going to help you. Okay? So let's actually point out some content. So the other thing besides strategy you need is just basic content knowledge. That's what you're tested in school. If you're in a bio class, they test you in bio. You get an A in bio, that means you understand the content or the knowledge of biology. Same with physics or history, even math. So here's content. So the other thing you're going to need to be successful on this test is content. And that's something as simple as the number 0. So looking at this, if you guys can chat in what you think the answer is, and the number 0 is even, odd, neither, and maybe you don't care or really don't care, and let me know.
I'm seeing mostly
Rob, if you have some.
C. Yeah, mostly C for neither.
All right, let's look at here's another question for you math geniuses out here. Is the number 0 positive, negative, neither? As long as we don't get any E's, then I'm happy.
Yep, all are saying neither.
All right. Well, here's where content comes into play. Now, if you don't know 0 is actually even, you're going to get a question wrong. Now, they don't just come out on the SAT and say, hey, is 0 even? They wouldn't ask you that. What they would do is they would put it in a problem such as, how many distinct even integers are in the number 202,484,315,027? Well, if you don't know what distinct means, if you don't know what an integer is, and if you don't know 0 is even, you're going to get a question wrong on the SAT. So the content knowledge is really important on this exam. And some of you guys got 1 right and 1 wrong on this. And that was supposed to be an easy question, but it's not, because we forgot it. Some of you are in calculus or algebra and trig, and you had 0. Actually, my son in 2nd grade is learning 0 now. So it's not that easy when you test it on stuff you forgot. So the types of things you need to know are things fundamental math, such as properties of 0. We just saw it. Prime numbers, ratios, proportions, basic arithmetic, algebra 1, geometry. That's what's being tested. That's the content you need to understand. So you need to understand how to do area of a triangle, okay? But then also how it's applied to a question on the SAT. The other thing you're going to need is technique, and those are step-by-step methods for solving specific problem types. Okay, so in math, when you see a certain problem, there's a way to solve it. Now, I'm going to show you one example. We won't do just because of time. I've got so many different questions. This is a grammar question. Okay, so here's a problem that I'm going to show you. I'm going to walk you through it really quickly. And when we first look at it here, it's talking about a couple content items for math. Well, one of them is average. The other thing you'll see is a letter. So this is actually testing 2 different things. It's talking about algebra and average, because it's a variable in here. So we look at this problem, it's a number 12, so it's actually going to be a medium problem. How do we go about doing it? And because of time, again, I'm going to show you something that we do at Princeton Review. We have some techniques. When you see a problem like this, whether it's an average problem or an algebraic problem, we teach you a certain type of method. And that method or technique is called a plug-in. And what we do with plug-in, okay, and you're able to do this all over the math test. It's one of the most highly used techniques we teach at Princeton Review, is instead of using algebra, we're just going to plug in a number for n to make it easier so we can do simple math. So if we were to do something like this, the other thing we're going to teach you in our technique is something called the average wheel. And the average wheel looks like this. You have the total on the top. You have the number of things in the bottom left and the average on the right. So if you were looking for what the average was, you would take the total, divide it by the number of things, and you can find your average. I don't expect you to understand it right now, but the point is we teach you techniques and methods that are proven. We prove them by actually trying these out, testing them out, and they work. They really work because I've seen it. So we've got 2 techniques working here on the same problem. But if you know how to do this, and again, we work this over weeks and weeks and weeks. So the first thing we're going to do is we draw our average wheel and we plug in for n. I'm picking 8. You can pick 10, whatever you want to do. 8's probably a good number because I'm using it. And then the next thing you do is plug in n, and then you start solving the problem. Okay? So if we were to start solving the problem here, we plug in n for 8. That means the average is 8. Okay? Our total is, or the number of tests is 4, so our total is going to be 32. We fill in the average wheel. Then we're going to have to draw another average wheel because on her 5th test, so now, again, it's a medium problem. So there's 2 steps. A lot of times medium and hard problems have more than 1 step. So now we actually have to plug in, we actually have to fill in the rest of the wheel now. So if there's 5 tests and it says she exceeds her previous average by 20 points. Okay, again, I'm going to go through it really fast. So exceeding her previous average, and the average was 8 by 20 points, so it now becomes 8 plus 20, which gives us 28. So our new total, instead of 32, our new total is going to be 60 here. There it is. Okay, so now the way we find our average, and I talked about it before, it's 60 divided by 5, and our new average is 12. Now it sounds like, boy, there's a lot of steps in here, but you got to get really good at this. It's all about practicing and repetition. Once you learn how to do this, these problems will become easier and easier. So once we have 12, then the next step is going to be to actually plug in 8 to the answer choices, and we're looking for our target of 12. And once we find 12, which is B here, we're going to find our answer. So that's what we call a technique, and I wanted to walk you through it real quickly so you understand the difference between a strategy and here's a technique of doing something step by step. Average wheel, plug in, and there are steps to be had. And there are steps for all the different question types on the SAT. If you don't have good technique or methods, you're going to do poorly. You need some consistency and something that works. So you need to find out if you need that or not. Okay? So that's a technique. All right, so we're going to move on here, and I'm not going to do more problems just because of time. There's some critical reading, and again, there's techniques on everything that we do. Here's sentence completions. If you haven't seen an SAT, this is what a sentence completion looks like. And we have techniques for doing that as well that actually work with the clues within the sentence. Kind of, since we're going to be wrapping it up soon. The other important thing you're going to need, I said you need 5 things. First one was content, actually. The second is strategy. The third is technique. The fourth is going to be practice. Triple P means practice, practice, practice. You have to take multiple practice exams. You don't go in cold and try to take it for real. You're not going to do well typically. And taking multiple tests, you're going to actually increase your confidence, increase your endurance, you're going to lower your test anxiety, and then you got to analyze what you do. Find out what your weaknesses are. Okay, so if you haven't taken a practice test yet, I highly recommend going to princetoU.com/events. You'll be able to take a practice SAT or ACT and see how you do. Use that as what I call your baseline, and then find out what schools you want to go to find your goal, and that gap in between will help you determine how much time and preparation you need to put in. So we've got our practice. So these are the 5 things that you're going to need to succeed on the SAT. Okay, so these 5 things are really important. We mentioned content. So the number 0, prime numbers, ratios, grammar elements, misplaced modifiers, right, reading skills. Then strategy, your timing, your pacing, your guessing, elimination, your technique. I showed you plug in an average wheel real quickly. Practice and analysis, and then finally building your confidence and endurance. If you have these 5 things, you're probably going to succeed on your SAT. Most students who do well in high school, sometimes they don't have the strategy or the technique, or they don't take a lot of practice because they think they're going to do well and they just go in cold, and that's why you see a lot of good students, and I was one of those, who don't do as well on these exams because they don't learn how to guess. They don't answer the question. They just leave it blank instead. So that can actually affect your score. Okay. So a couple other things to keep in mind is, and I'm going to say this again because it's really important, is find out what your goal is for the schools you want to go to. And if you take a practice test of ours, you can find your baseline. So whatever your baseline is, so let's say your baseline is going to be, and I'm just making it up, you took a practice test and you scored a 1500. And you want to go to Boston College, which is right around here, about a little over 2,000. Let's just call 2,000 to make the math simple. So your gap in here is about 500 points. Don't think you can go in within a week and just study a little bit and get 500-point improvement. That's going to take you all summer long. So you really need to take some formal, intensive preparation to kind of get that jump. And this is why it's important to take a practice test, get a baseline, or use your PSAT score and find your goal, because this doesn't happen easily. You know, if your gap is only 100 points, well, then maybe your road to success isn't as big as someone whose gap is 500 points. So I really encourage you to do something like that. Okay. All right, moving along. Here's a couple websites you can visit, the people who write the exams, and learn more about those exams. And in terms of Princeton Review, again, we help students prepare for it, and we have amazing teachers. You can learn more about Princeton at princeu.com. What I do want to tell you is we do have a guarantee. You can learn more about our offers, but for attending tonight, there is a special offer of a discount on a course, $250 off an ultimate course or tutoring. You can email me for the promotional code. I'm happy to send it to you if you're thinking that you need to prep. If you take a practice test and you have a score, and you can email me, hey, Anthony, I scored this, and I'm thinking about going to this school, I'll give you some advice, whether you maybe should take a more intensive program, maybe you can just get by with just a book if you only need 50 points. I'm happy to give you that advice. Okay. So this special offer is by April 30th. So if you're thinking about prepping over the summer, or you're going to be taking an exam in June or something, let me know and reach out to me. Okay. So again, in terms of taking a full-length test, please go to princeu.com/event. Take a test. You'll get a score report. It'll help you determine your prep needs, and it doesn't go on your record, so it's kind of nice that way. All right, and then the other thing that we have is if you want to try what we call a live online class, if you go, you can actually try that out and go to our website and take a look at one of our free events. It'll be more geared to what it would be like in one of our classrooms. So that's another option that you have instead. For those that are class of 2017 and beyond on the call, I don't know if we have any. I'm going to refer you to our princeu.com/SAT changes webpage. For those that are class of 2017 and beyond, the test is changing next spring, so spring 2016. I'm not going to go into that, but you need to understand that for some of you, if you're class of 2018, you'll be taking a new SAT, so some of the things I talked about tonight may not apply. If you're 2017, you actually have the opportunity to take either one, the current one or the one spring 2016. I'm pushing people to prep over the summer and take the current one if you're class of 2017, because prepping over the summer is a great way to not spend your summer, but before you're in school, before junior year gets all hectic. So I would recommend you do that. Other than that, with that said, here's my email again if you want to follow up with me on my phone number. Rob, I think we got about 20 minutes left or so we can open up for questions if you got any questions in the chat.
Yeah, so go ahead and type your questions to us, folks. They actually go to me, and then I read them to Anthony. So I have a few already queued up here. Two questions I'll read you, Anthony, because they're very similar. One says, when I take the SAT for the third time, should I focus on the sections I got lower scores in? And the other question is, I got a lower score the second time I took the SAT. What can I do to end up having a good super score? My weakest section is critical reading.
Right. Well, first of all, and this is a message out to everyone. The fact that you guys are taking it multiple times and one went down and you're on your third time is telling me that your approach could possibly not be correct. And then it's probably something you don't want to hear. But if you're going down, that tells me between the test you took and then the second test, and if you went down, you didn't prepare properly to get a better score. So again, it's so important. Why waste your time? If you're going to take it again, you need to really prepare properly. Now, hopefully some of the things I said got you thinking a little bit differently about this exam. Maybe you're not taking practice tests. You should know before you go into the actual test what you're scoring by taking practice tests along the way. So if you're not preparing properly, I mean, my students, they take, if I'm tutoring them, they take 5 full-length SATs. They know what they're going to score before they go in on test day. So for my student who's taking it for the third time, I don't know what your goal score is. I don't know where you started from and where you've improved. So I have no idea about that. So it's going to be a general answer unless you reach out to me directly and you give me more specifics. But you need to find out where can you get the biggest point of improvement. For example, one time I was tutoring a kid, and just in the essay alone, I knew I could improve him 100 points in the essay. So we spent a lot of times on the essay because that's where we were going to get the most points. So for you, if you're taking it a third time, where are you going to find your biggest points of improvement? Is it on the essay? Is it in the grammar section? Is it on the certain types of math questions that you consistently miss? You need to know, and when I say practice with analysis, you need to know what you get wrong and how many points is that going to be worth for you. So if you can focus on those things and find out that's going to help you get a better score. Now, if you're just trying to improve one section, then that's a different story. But for most students, it's typically where can I get the most points overall? And it's just understanding what you get right and wrong. And that comes with introspection and with analysis of the practice tests you're taking and all the questions and homework that you're doing along the way. If you are going to retake an exam, you better be taking full-length tests along the way to work on this approach. So that's what I would suggest you to do, doing time sections, full-length exams, analyzing what you're getting wrong and where you can find the most points of improvement. As I told you with the kid I was in the math section, he was started at 420 and he jumped to 610. One of the things we changed was stop them from answering every single math question because that was hurting him. So maybe it's a strategic shift for you, and that's what you need to find out. So it's hard for me to answer when I don't know you and how you test, but I would just say the more you know about how you test, the more practice you do, the more you understand it, you'll figure that out. So that's how I would answer that.
Thanks, Anthony. Similarly, there's a lot of questions about how many times should you take the test, and do colleges take the highest scores? What is super scoring? Can you give just kind of a brief synopsis of that and your strategy?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not a huge believer in taking it 3, 4, 5, 6 times. I mean, if I'm a college, just let's put it this way, and you're comparing someone with, I don't know, let's say a 1800 and someone with a 1750. The kid who took it 1750 took it twice. The kid who got an 1800 took it 9 times. The kid who took it 1750 plays a sport, is in the school band, is very active. The person who took it 9 times doesn't do anything else but take the SAT. That person looks obsessive and obsessive compulsive, and it's too much. You got to be careful. You shouldn't be just taking these tests to take these tests. Schools don't like it when you take it too many times. I tell my students, prepare for 1, leave time for 2, and have the ability to take it a third time if you start it early enough. But the idea is be one and done if you can. That means do it right the first time. Now, it sounds like a lot of you are coming back a second time, which is unfortunate. That means that maybe you didn't plan properly the first time. And maybe you did, and maybe you just didn't get the score you want. Understandable. I wouldn't go past 3 times. If you start your junior year You have the ability to take it probably 2 times your junior year, and then if you need to, a 3rd time your senior year. But when you're a senior, you should be just applying, so you focus on applications, because that's a separate ballgame. I said the test is just one piece. If you turn in a bad essay, you don't get good recommendations because you have no time because you're prepping or trying to take these tests, then your application is shoddy, and that doesn't look good as well. So my suggestion would be to I didn't go over my. So prep for 1, plan for 2, leave time for 3. I wouldn't go more than 3. I don't like my students taking it more than 2 times. So if you guys have already taken it 3 times, you got to rethink your approach, because sometimes, and I've recommended this. Some people go, well, shoot, I want to hit this perfect score. I've had people that have taken it, they scored 750 in math, and they want to take it again and get an 800 in math. Well, that extra 50 points isn't as important as maybe writing a good college admissions essay. So you got to also think strategically of what's more important: 20 more points on the SAT or 30 more points, or doing something else, volunteering here or writing an essay. So, all right, next question, Rob.
Yeah, you mentioned the essay. Actually, I'll get to that one in a minute. You mentioned taking the SAT multiple times and advantages, disadvantages. What about the SAT versus the ACT? What's the difference between the two, and how do you recommend a student figures out which one's best for them?
Great question. I get this all the time in terms of, which one should I take, which one's better suited for me. Well, the first thing is next Tuesday I'm doing a session on the ACT, so you can kind of join that as well if you wanted to. But yes, students can actually, for colleges, it doesn't matter if you take the SAT or the ACT. So it's really going to depend on what your preferences are. And if you can take a practice test in both, you can kind of get a sense of which one you're better suited for. Now, if you're a junior now, you don't have a lot of time to try both exams and go for both. So again, it's also planning with enough time. But there are some differences. ACT is a little more straightforward. It's not as tricky. The SAT has more emphasis on vocabulary. ACT has a science section, and there's more type of reading comprehension involved. The ACT tests a higher level of math. So again, you got to understand the differences between the tests and what suits you better, and for everybody. For some people, it's negligible, the difference of what they would score in both. For some, they score better on the ACT. For some, they score better on the SAT. ACT is more of a big picture exam. The SAT has more sections. So what I would suggest you do is learn more about the exams. If you go to princeu.com, you can find out some of the differences, how you can go. We also have an assessment where you can try both exams within one and see which one you're better suited for. So I would try to do some things like that.
Great. I have a lot of questions about the essay. What are some good strategies for the essay? Does length matter? What do the readers look for? What do the essay readers look for? What are the graders looking for in the essay portion? So yeah, generally questions about any general essay strategies you have and what are graders looking for?
Well, I mean, again, as with any section of the test, it's about strategy and technique. So, in 1 minute, I'm not going to be able to tell you how to write the best essay for the SAT. But what I can tell you is you want to have the idea of how the test writers grade the essay. If you understand what they look for when they grade an essay, it's going to help you write a better essay. For example, having an introduction and body paragraphs and a conclusion and having good structure to your essay is going to get you a better score. If you don't write a conclusion, it won't be as good. They won't grade you as high. So structure becomes important. It's also the use of your language and your wording becomes very important. Also, if they give you 2 pages to write and you write 1 page, that doesn't look as good as well. So what I'm going to suggest is, again, know the test writers. Know what they're looking for when you grade, and you can easily find that out. You can easily get information from the College Board about sample essay prompts. Okay, so and then learning some techniques. At Princeton U, we teach some technique within that essay. The last kid I tutored for his essay got a perfect essay score. He went up over 100 points on the essay alone, just from teaching him the right way how to write an essay. So it's really a big point factor. You can make a lot of changes to that and get high improvements on that. But structure, length, yeah, it's all important. Neatness will come into play, but there's a lot more to it in terms of choosing your examples, how you write about it, how you explore and kind of detail your essay. I don't have time to kind of go into that now. If you want to reach out to me directly, you can. Maybe I will help you out a little bit. But if you're looking just for help on the essay, you can get a tutor and just have somebody tutor you for a few hours, and you can knock it out of the park.
Great. 2 questions regarding critical reading. One is, any general tips around vocabulary? Should you sit down and with a list of words and memorize them? What's the best way to do that? And then also, general critical reading strategy. Should you read the passage first and then the questions, or the questions first and then the passage?
Great questions. Now, well, first again, I'm gonna restate this, and I've said it before. It does sound like a lot, based on the questions I'm hearing, is some of you are in this time crunch. You need to get better scores on your SAT tomorrow, which is telling me that maybe you haven't prepared properly and you're looking for last-minute tips and pointers to get the best score possible. I'm going to encourage you, if some of you have the time, it's important to learn about all these things well in advance so you're not at the last minute dragging or scraping for the last points you can get. It is a process, and you've got to treat it as such. It takes 2 to 3 months to kind of go through all this. But in terms of critical reading, one of the mistakes I made when I was in high school is I read the whole passage, then went to the questions. It's a very bad way to do it. The better way would be to skim the passage, and it's a little different for each of my students and how they skim and what they actually look at and what they read. Some read barely anything, and some read some topic sentences. It really depends on the student. So you definitely don't want to read the whole passage, but you want to get a glimpse of what the passage looks like, and then go right to the questions, because the questions give you the ability. For example, a question might say in line 10 to 14. Well, now they're telling you where that question and the answer is going to be. So you don't need to read the passage, because if you do read the whole thing first, it will confuse you, because those questions become most of them are very specific questions. So in a nutshell, it's best not to read the whole passage first. So that's what I would say about the critical reading. But there's a lot more to it. There's just a lot more to it. It's a very hard section. It requires a lot of time and energy to break it down and do what you need to do in it. So I wouldn't say, oh, well, shoot, now I'll just go right to the questions and I'm golden, and that's not the case.
Any general tips for time management, making sure you don't run out of time on a specific section?
It starts with practice. You need to understand, are you running out of time? How much time are you running out to? Where do you spend your time? So you actually have to do an analysis of yourself. Where do you get caught? You know, for some, and it might be different in every section. For me, when I was doing it back in the day, I spent a lot of time reading the passages. Well, I didn't learn until after the fact that I could save a lot of time by going to the questions first. For math, maybe you spend too much time on the hard questions and it's not worth it. So you may be spending time in the wrong place. So you need to understand yourself as an SAT tester first before you can kind of come to any conclusion for you. So it's going to be very individual. Some students go through it quickly too. If you go through questions quick and you're finishing a section, maybe you're just being careless too, so maybe that's not a good thing for you. So again, you need to understand what you get right and what you get wrong, where you spend most of your time, how much time per question you're spending, and it shouldn't even be about that. It's about accuracy and where should you spend your time. For example, when I do reading comprehension questions with some students, some of my students, there's some questions they're better suited for than others, and those are the questions they focus on. So in addition to that is which questions should you do first becomes important. So you got to figure that out as well. So in terms of time management, if you understand those things about what you get right, what your personal order of difficulty is, that'll help you time manage your tests. Again, take it on your own terms. And if you know what you're better at, then what questions you are better suited for, do those first. That will save you, that'll be the best time management you have.
Great. We have some questions about the SAT subject tests. When should I consider taking them, and how do I know if I need them?
Well, it depends on where you're going to go to school. So for competitive schools, they're typically required. So you need to check with the schools you're applying to if you should be taking those, number one. Number two, the best rule of thumb is, if, for example, if you're in an AP class in U.S. history, well, take the subject test in U.S. history because it's the same test writer in ETS. You're already studying U.S. history, so it makes sense. The other time frame wise, you should be taking it in May or June of that school year because you're in that subject. Too many times I get students who it's maybe September and they go, oh yeah, I had chemistry, I finished that in June, and they go, should I take the chemistry subject test? Well, you just missed the window. You had all summer to forget everything you learned about chemistry. So now is the time, May and June of this year, if you're in a AP test or in a subject you're doing well in, whether it be physics, biology, chemistry, U.S. history, world history, take it now, May or June of this year, and get those out of the way. If you don't know where you want to go to school, keep your options open and still take them now. And that's why the subject tests are better suited for May and June. SAT can be done anytime.
All right, final question. This is the all-important question here, Anthony, so I hope you're ready. I hear that when in doubt, pick answer choice C. Is this correct?
The infamous. No, it's not correct.
All right. I guess we have time for one more. I guess we have time for one more. That was unusually succinct, but no further comments needed.
Perfect.
Let's see here. All right. For the last minute, we got a lot of questions around this. I was going to avoid it, but I think we have time for it. If we go over a minute, I think it's okay. Can you go back to the average wheel? A lot of people are curious about that average wheel.
Oh, it opens up more cans of worms. Again, it's a technique. All I can say, guys, is it's about learning techniques for doing problems, and the average wheel is just one technique. So for some people, you might have your own way of doing an average. At Princeton Review, we have our way of doing it. So it's learning techniques. That's all I'm going to say about it. So there's no point in going over it now because then you're going to want to learn more about it. Well, either you got to find a way to how to do averages, or you work with Princeton Review. They show you how, but you got to learn techniques for problem types.
All right, fair enough. Well, it's at the hour now, so a lot of questions are on this PowerPoint. Will I receive this information? We were recording this presentation, so you all will receive a YouTube link to the video of the recording. You'll also get, as Anthony mentioned, all the information in a follow-up email with his contact info and some good general information from Princeton Review, some discounts on courses, etc. Thank you so much for your time and for attending. Anthony, thank you for yet again another wonderful presentation. And any closing words?
Nope, I would take some practice tests if you're unsure about things and go from there. So.
All right. Thanks a lot, Anthony. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.